Yeah. Who's going to be the next? Dan Harkins?
Yeah, he does a very reasonable job. So. Yeah, he done it in the past. He done a reasonable job. All right. Yes, good morning. Good afternoon. So this is IETF Crypto Forum Research Group meeting. We're getting bigger rooms and they're getting colder. Just, I don't know, to keep you awake or not. So we are two chairs this time, me and Nick. Updated Note well. I hope you've seen it this week. If not, I suggest you download slides and make sure that you read them. Right. Actually, can you click on agenda? Just very quick. This is our agenda, just to double check that if people want to bash the agenda. Right. We have Jabba relay person. Thank you, Valerie. We have Dan Harkins taking notes. Thank you. We have blue sheets going around the room, I hope. Right. Very quick update on documents. We have one new RFC published on rekeying. Thank you, Stanislav, for driving this work. Oh, and my apologies for listing the document twice. It's no longer in RFC editor's queue, it's already published. In Argon document is very nearly done. I think the next step is for IETF chair to review, double check the document and ask IRSG for objections to publish. Randomness improvements document, it's done. Did you want? We still have IP action. No, sorry, no, that's hashtag. Right. I think I'll do review. I'll need to follow up and send it to Colin as well. Spec 2 is waiting for Kenny. We have lots of documents in flight. We have a couple of new documents. One is CFRG pairing friendly curves. And Ristretto document was adopted by CFRG, but 00 document wasn't published yet. I just got email from one of the editors that they're working on this. In addition to this, we're also going through pack selection process, which is being driven by Stanislav. Thank you again for this. We'll have a presentation on this. Okay, next slide. Also, we have a crypto review panel, which initial term.
Hi, just a question on the previous slide.
Yeah.
The Argon 2 draft, did that get updated? Did I miss an update?
I think I think it was very little thing that you agreed was okay as is.
Okay, we should chat afterwards because I was expecting an update, so maybe we should just double check where we're at with that.
Yes,
one.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Sure. I think that's what the useful part about bringing the slides, because it helps us to figure out whether we're waiting for anybody, and just to make sure that we ask you the right question and you know what the state of it is as well.
Yes, yes. And for the note taker, I'm Colin Perkins.
Thank you. So Crypto Review Panel was formed in September 2016. Realistically started reviewing documents for CFRG security area independent stream in beginning 2017. With PAC selection process, we asked members to continue till the end of the year. Chairs have decided about new membership, but we just need to contact various people to double check, make sure that nobody wants to not accept since being nominated. And we hopefully should be announcing this next week, membership for the next 2 years. Right, and with PAC selection process, Stanislav will talk more about what we've done and what the next steps are. We basically, with Crypto Review Panel's help, we narrowed down choices to 2 balanced and 2 augmented PACs. Because we didn't end up with 1 and 1 in each category, we need to do a bit more work. By we, it's the whole community with Crypto Review Panel, and a little bit of work from submitters. So this will be presented next. Okay, yeah.
Thank you, Alex and Nick. So, about the status of PAC selection process. All of this started in Bangkok in IETF106. So, there was a decision to start the PAC selection process. It started this May, and we had 2 stages, 1 and 2, before the Montreal meeting. Oh, it's better. And in Montreal, we discussed this, and we had 8 good nominated PACs, nominated by the persons enumerated in the slide. And after that, we had 4 more stages. On stage 3, we asked people to be the reviewers for the enumerated questions. We had a number of additional questions to be asked, to be taken into account. The questions are on the slide. And we had a really great team of reviewers with really deep, really wise reviews. All of these people are on the slide. Many thanks for all of them. These reviews are, in fact, I would say, most wise and wide and deep understanding of PACs at all, not only the process, I would say. So they are related to the IPsec and TLS protocols, about other applications of PACs, about security, including security proofs, including additional security issues, and about some other business with some additional applications, with some special properties of PACs. So again, many thanks for all these people on the slide. The process and the overall reviews were made based on these reviews. And then on stage 4, we had the reviewing process started, and many thanks to Jaron Schaefer for organizing the PAC selection GitHub repository. So all the reviews, all nominated PACs, all intermediate results are public here, so please go there and read everything about the process. We try to be perfectly transparent here. Then on stage 5, we had 4 people from Crypto Review Panel to review all of this. So we had 4 overall reviews for all 8 PACs from Björn Tagman, Russ Housley, Jaron Schäfer, and Stanislav Myshlev, and all of them are made available again on GitHub. And to be very short, these 4 reviews state the following things: that so all of them have some preferences about packs, and I highlighted them in the slides with blue for balanced packs and magenta for augmented packs. So at the end of the day, we had in fact 4 packs that were liked by some reviewers, and so we had the plans to announce something here after stage 6, and so we had 4 overall reviews. We don't have any conflicts or contradictory opinions of the reviewers, so I think the understanding of the situation is more or less similar, but we don't have a single opinion which one can be the only best one. So there was a decision to start round 2 with 4 packs going to round 2. These 4 packs are SPAKE2, CPACE, OPAC, and OCPACE, 2 balanced packs and 2 augmented packs. So 4 candidates left. All reviewers were more or less in favor of these candidates. And another reason for going to round 2 is that at the last stages of pack selection process, there were some additional issues discussed in the mailing list. For example, quantum annoyance, post-quantum readiness, some issues about whether we are ready to that one discrete logarithm to be broken can make the whole protocol broken, or just some instances of this. So we had some particular questions, some overall questions, and they were not addressed in the reviews because it were raised later. So we decided to start round 2. Moreover, in the reviews, there were desire to have both one balanced pack and one augmented pack, and luckily we have 2 plus 2 candidates, 2 for balanced and 2 for augmented. So in my opinion, the intention can be, but it's on an intention, to select 1 or 0 balanced pack and 1 or 0 augmented pack. So in fact, allocating 2 categories of contest. The proposed plan and timeline for round 2. So stage 1 of round 2 starts tomorrow. So we plan to collect additional questions for all 4 candidates. These questions can be about particular questions or modifications for each candidate. For example, some issues about the reduced versions of CPACE and OCPACE, about possible modifications of SPAKE2 with selection of its parameters based on hashtag curve, and some other particular questions about the nominated packs, and overall questions that can be taken into account additionally. So these questions are collected via crypto panel at IETF.org. This mailing list is public, so everyone can read everything there. At stage 2, which will last until 17th of December, the list of any questions will be published at the GitHub, and the CFRG will be asked if anything else should be added to the list. At stage 3, we'll ask our authors of nominations to prepare the replies to these additional questions and provide the clarifications or maybe additional security proofs. And at stage 4, again, crypto review panel members will prepare new overall reviews, of course, based on both previous results, because on round 2 we collected most part of information about everything, and taking into account replies for new questions on round 2. And so in Vancouver, we'll I have the status update, and again, the review of the process will be given, and if everything is clear, 1 or 0 balanced pack is selected, 1 or 0 augmented pack is selected, and a CFRG document, like recommendations for packs in IETF protocols, seem to be announced. So a quick comment that in one of the reviews by Yaron Scheffer, there was a really great summary of why we seem to need this CFRG document about recommended packs, because even after we select 1 or 2 or 0 packs, we'll have protocols, we have clarifications, but we'll still need to make all recommendations for integration into IETF protocols really clear, with test vectors, with addressing all issues that can be raised by IETF people. So we'll need to have additional work to make this document for the selected packs. And so this seems to be our next actions after we select packs. So what's now? Now we ask all CFRG and also, of course, crypto review panel members to send their additional questions that must be considered during round 2 for all packs. So please send them to cryptopanel at IETF.org, and I'll repeat this request today or tomorrow to the CFRG mailing list. So many thanks. Any questions? Okay, so thank you.
Next is Chris Wood is going to be speaking for Riyad Wabi.
All right, everyone, my name is Chris Wood. This is a quick update on the hash to curve draft. Since the last meeting, we've made several major updates. I guess perhaps the most important one is that we removed an algorithm that was redundant with a lot of things that we've already, or with other algorithms already present in the document. That's a cart, so that should help simplify things moving forward. We promoted the simplified SWU map that was specifically meant for repairing friendly curves up to the main part of the document. Previously, it was in an appendix, and it has applications to other curves, so that's useful. And then we generalized, or Riyad generalized, the SWU algorithm to apply to basically any curve in the document, whereas previously it only applied to curves with the base field whose prime was congruent to 1 mod 3. So not much more to say beyond that. And then a lot of minor updates went into the document as well. So in particular, we had this issue for a long time about adding like a sort of flow chart for how you choose a particular hash to curve algorithm for a particular curve. And we replaced that idea with just a simple block of text that basically says if you want to target, a pairing friendly curve, use the SWU variant that makes the most sense. If you want to target a Montgomery curve, use Alligator 2. In all other cases, use a variant of SWU that is the most efficient. So simplified SWU being preferred in some cases, and then the general one being recommended in all other cases. There was also a request, I forget from whom, to sort of allow other hash to base implementations to be plugged in. And while we didn't actually specify alternative constructions for hash to base, we basically laid down what the criteria would be for that particular function. Including things like it must be collision resistant, it must not use rejection sampling or the try and increment thing to hash to the curve or hash to the base field. So if someone wanted to do something other than the HKDF based function that we've defined, they should follow the guidelines, and hopefully everything will work out just fine. We also added some clarity around how to do domain separation in the document, particularly how to construct the domain separation tag when adding hash to curve to other protocols. Listing things like including a protocol version number or some other kind of unique identifying information. And I guess with relevance to domain separation, we did tweak the hash to base function a little bit. In particular, previously we would not hash the input message or we would hash the input message repeatedly in the iteration step. There's like the initial expand message or extract message, and then for each, I guess if you're looking at, I think it was extension fields for each element or each coordinate in the polynomial representation for an extension field, you would do an expansion with HKDF with the full message, which was possibly redundant. So now what we do is just hash the message upon immediately calling hash to base, and then for each element in the polynomial representation, then you would just hash something or call HKDF extract with a smaller input. But to make sure that no call to HMAC in that function doesn't collides with one another, the initial hash step that we do, the initial HKDF expand step that we do, appends a 0 byte to the end of the message, because the internal HMAC invocations from HKDF expand only append non-negative numbers larger or equal to 1. Anyways, you can take a look at the document to sort of figure out what I mean there. We did also specify and make it very clear how to compute the sign of the resulting point for the output of a hash to curve operation. And we made it part of the cipher suites, so there's no ambiguity. And this was done specifically to help alignment with the VRF draft. So hopefully now everything should be in good shape and they can adopt it as a simple call to hash to curve rather than respecifying alligator 2 or SW in their doc. And that work is currently underway. We added some optimized and constant time square root computations because those were useful, or those previously we didn't really have any kind of concrete algorithm for doing so. We just said, compute the square root and do it in a constant time way. But now we just really flushed that out for different primes or different, computing square root and fields of different primes. And if all else fails, if you don't have an optimized version for a particular prime, we just use a constant time version of Tonelli-Shanks. And we added some code to generate the certain parameters for the SW map that has been generalized. Also like to note that the domain separation stuff that I was referring to earlier is the output of, or came about from discussion with Chris Patton and Benjamin Lip, who have been helping a lot with this draft on the side. So a special thanks to them. So there are basically two major items that we need to do before moving this forward. The first of which is to add the test vectors back that we took out before because the document was changing so much. We're adding new algorithms and so on. So we have a proof of concept stage code in the repository where the document is hosted, and most likely we just generate the test vectors from there. There are ongoing implementations in Go, C, and Rust, and we'd like to finish them and make sure they all interoperate with the test vectors. And assuming all goes well, assuming those two things happen in the near short term, we'd then like to potentially consider starting the last call for this particular document. That's all I have. I'm turning to the chairs to see if that plan sort of makes sense. Cool. Okay. Does anyone have any questions?
Stanislav Myshlev. Many thanks again for doing this. I think that a lot of protocols, even in CFRG, really need this. At least there were some discussions about possible usage of hash to curve in PEX. So many thanks, and I'll be happy to review the document while it will be on the review process. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That's actually a good question. At what point should we request crypto panel review for this? At any point?
Yeah, anytime you think it's useful.
Okay. I mean, I think we're at a point now where the content is relatively solidified, so it would be good to send it over to them.
If it's stable, if it's not going to change massively, now it's a good time.
But yeah, okay, great. Okay, and so I think we're at that point.
Just send us a reminder.
Yep, we'll do. All right, unless there's any other questions, we can move on. Thank you.
I have no comments. If you like more time, you can have it. Go ahead and schedule if you want more time. No, it's fine. I was sort of kidding.
So, good afternoon, everyone. This is a draft on HPKE that we've been working on, this hybrid public key encryption, ECIES renewed and modernized. I'd like to thank Chris Wood for using the official standard theme for this session, as well as in the hash to curve session. So this is a draft that, as I guess we're in 02 now, because we noticed we published 01 and then published 02 a few hours later, as I recall, because we found some obvious errors to rejiggered some things. But as of now, I think we are getting pretty stable. So in 01, 02 of the research group version of the draft, we've been just kind of polishing things. So there are a couple of minor technical changes based on some feedback from implementers. So we're using hashes of values instead of the values themselves in some cases, because people didn't want to keep the whole values around. Chris sent us a PR for a quote single shot API. So we had this decoupled structure where you set up an encryption context that you can use multiple times to amortize the cost of the public key operation. But if you're just doing a single encryption, it's nice to just compose that all together at once. So we've got a kind of simplified profile in the doc now too. In general, kind of cleaning up the doc, getting it ready to get done. With the core mechanism firming up, the next logical step is to start looking at implementation and interop. The latest versions of the draft have test vectors for all 4 of the modes and several of the cipher suites. We didn't do the full combinatorial explosion of all the different possible combinations of algorithms, but we took a couple slices through the algorithm space and did all of the modes for those cases. And so based on those test vectors, we've verified interop on at least the first 2 modes, the base mode and the PSK mode, between a Go implementation that I've been using from which we generated the test vectors and a C implementation that Chris has been working on. So we're starting to see some interop here. That kind of validates that the spec is plausible. The other major thing we want to get done before we publish this is to have some security analysis that verifies it's okay. Benjamin Lip at INRIA has been working on this, and these are kind of the current state of his results. So what he's been working on is developing some proofs in CryptoVerif, one of these automated verification tools, that if you make reasonable assumptions about the underlying primitive, so you assume the DH group satisfies the GAP-DH assumption, that your AEAD is a proper AED, and that your KDF has the properties you'd expect, that if you take good primitives, then you end up with a good compound. So you have INDCCA2 as public key encryption. So you have that indistinguishability property, and that you get the authentication properties that you would get that you expect based on the mode. So in the PSK mode, the PSK, the ciphertext can only be generated by someone who has that PSK, and the auth modes only by someone who has the relevant private key. So status here is Benjamin has proofs done for these base cases for all 4 modes in the case where you're not considering key compromise. And the key we mean here is the authentication key. So the difference between the left-hand side and the right-hand side columns is in the right column. What we're verifying is that the confidentiality properties, the indistinguishability property holds even when the authentication key is leaked. So whatever the PSK or the initiator's private key that are both used for authentication and not for confidentiality, what we're trying to prove in those cases is that those confidentiality properties of the overall encryption still hold, even if the authentication keys have been leaked. Yeah, Chris.
Chris, I didn't want to comment on anything you said. I just wanted to, for people in the room, we are trying to also generalize the analysis to cover just chems in general. The assumptions here are specifically the GAP-Diffie-Hellman problem for the Diffie-Hellman chem. But since one of the hallmarks of this document is that you can plug in any chem, presumably, and still have things work, we're trying to make it a bit more generic. So that's work in progress, but for right now, we're just kind of focusing on the Diffie-Hellman variants.
Yeah, so if other people would like to help out with the analysis, contribute, I'm glad to have help here. So that's basically the status. The document is starting to get complete. We think the core construction is pretty sound and interoperably specified, and the analysis is progressing so far. We have proved out some of the core properties, and we're trying to get the remainder, cover the remaining cases with some further proofs. So I think we're getting close to a point of research group last call here. I don't know how you guys want to arrange it. I mean, I think the major outstanding thing is the analysis timeline. Might need a little while longer for those to come in, but that could be done potentially in parallel with the research group last call. So up to the chairs about how you'd like to progress this. Chris, did you have a comment?
Wait for that.
Cheers.
Yeah, I think we can do CFRG last call and just hold the document, waiting for. I think that shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, great. That's all I've got. Thanks.
Just
Chris.
quickly for timeline things, it's very likely that encrypted SNI will depend on this, given the way things are going, and we're aiming to have that done early next year, at least to the point where we can start experimenting. And there are also other things that have started using HPKE. So we may want to get this out sooner rather than later.
Are you looking for like RFC, or are you looking for like stable?
I think stable would be fine, but
Yeah.
other people might want stable or RFC. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we need to make decision in the room. So
That's fine.
I suspect chairs can accommodate, within reason. If it's stable enough, then we can. Yeah,
Cool. I just wanted to make the dependency sort of known.
fair comment.
Okay. Tama?
All right, so I would like to propose Deoxys. It's an authenticated encryption algorithm with two special properties, which is called beyond birthday and nonce misuse resistance. I will explain very quickly for those who are not sure what this is.
Oh, just say next. Sorry.
So basically, we are trying to propose three different primitives. The first one is a tweakable block cipher, so it's like the core primitive that we designed. And on top of that, we have two modes that's going to be using this internal primitive. Thanks. So what is authenticated encryption? So basically, it's authentication and encryption in the single primitive. The goal is basically to try to avoid having some weird security issues you can have if you use them separately in a wrong way. So if you have everything unified in one primitive, then you hope to be sure that it's going to be fine. And also the goal is to have some efficiency gain. So if you do both at the same time, you can save some operation, have something much more efficient. And actually what I'd like to propose is something called AED, authenticated encryption with associated data, which means some data will be encrypted and authenticated, and some data will be only authenticated, not encrypted. So we would like to have this feature as well. So it turns out that this was a hot topic in the crypto research community. So there was a competition organized from 2014 to 2019 called the CESAR competition, organized by Dan Bernstein. And so a lot of people from the community participated. It was like worldwide competition, like 50-something submission. And after 5 years, they selected some candidates for the 3 portfolios. And here, what I'm proposing here is the winner of one of the portfolio. So first, what is beyond birthday security? So actually, most of the cipher modes, so if you use AES block cipher inside a mode like OCB, AES GCM, what you're going to get is what's called birthday security, which means that your advantage of the adversary will grow its square in the number of queries that you actually make to the internal cipher. So rather quickly, you're going to get that after some amount of data you're going to query to the encryption oracle, the security will drop rather fast. So actually, in the case of AES, if you use 2 to the 64 data, which is quite a huge number, I have to say, but after this amount of data, all the security is lost completely. You can really have many different type of attacks and everything falls apart. So beyond birthday secure modes are more than trying to go beyond that. So even if you use a lot of data, you still maintain the security to a very good level. So there's different spectrum of security you can still maintain. Some will be close to birthday, but some can be like full security, completely maintained, n-bit security if you use an n-bit block cipher. So that's what we'd like to propose today. Just to show you some curves. Basically, this on the x-axis is the advantage, is the number of queries. Y-axis is the advantage of the adversary. So when it's high, it's highly secure, and this is security is reducing. And those are most mode will be the blue line, basically, like OCB or GCM. And what we're trying to propose are modes like this. So even though you make a lot of queries, you do encrypt a lot of data, security remains quite high. Second property that we like to propose is nonce misuse resistance. I think this is quite important. So most of the authenticated encryption mode you're going to be using, you need a nonce, so like a value that's not repeating. And modes like OCB, ASGCM, if you reuse just a single time the nonce, then again, all security falls apart. You can have universal forgery attack, you can have decryption. So really, you really must make sure that the nonce is never, ever repeated. And that's a strong constraint on the implementers. So basically, you have generally two ways of handling this. Either you generate the nonce randomly, then you hope that the nonce is big enough and your entropy source is also good enough, so you don't have collision too often. Otherwise, you can use a counter for the nonce, but then you must use a state and maintain a state as long as the key is not changed between the two parties. You must maintain a state for the counter, and this is also quite maybe a strong constraint. So the goal is to design primitives then that do not have this issue, and even if you are reducing the nonce, you still maintain a good level of security, and the security will not fall apart. And again, you have a big spectrum of possibilities here. Some will be a little bit secure if you reduce the nonce, and some can be up to, it makes no difference if you repeat the nonce or not. So I will go very quickly about our design. So first thing we design is basically an internal primitive, and it's something a little bit special. It's called a tweakable block cipher. So this is joint work with Jérémy Jean and Ivica Nikolic. We published this at Azure 2014, and this is part of the winning candidates of the CISA competition. So what is tweakable block cipher? So block cipher like AES looks like this. You have a plain text and a key, and goes to it outputs ciphertext, and you must be able to decrypt. And tweakable block cipher is exactly the same thing. You just have an extra tweak input in here that allows you to select a family, basically, of block cipher. This tweak can be public, and it actually changes a lot of things when you are designing some modes. Having this extra tweak input makes things much, much simpler. And you can also have much better bounds. So basically, you can build a lot of things very easily with a tweakable block cipher. Problem is there's so far, as I know of, there's no standards of a tweakable block cipher so far. So what we try to do is start with AES, of course, and try to put some tweak inside AES. So it looks like this very quickly. The blue part is the AES round function that we use kind of a black box. And we just basically redesign the key schedule of the AES and try to get something a bit stronger, with like stronger guarantees than the AES key schedule, and also to be able to use a tweak inside. Okay, so that's basically how it works. So we have lots of security guarantees, a lot of analysis that we did in the paper. You can take a look at our website or our paper to see all these arguments. And an important point is that the trust in the block cipher, in the crypto primitive, is put by how much cryptanalysis has been done. So actually, our candidate has been one of the most scrutinized algorithm in the competition. So a lot of people try to analyze it, and still very comfortable security margin. But there's a lot of cryptanalysis paper that has been published on this. The goal was also to reuse AES so that we can reuse the security arguments of AES. So there's been decades of analysis on AES. So we hope to leverage this so we don't have to redo everything again. Also, it's quite efficient because we're using the AES round as a black box. So you can use hardware acceleration that you have on recent processors. So it can run on less than 1 cycle per byte, basically. And we have no patents. There's no patent on this. So that's the primitive. Now we need to define a mode that's going to use this primitive to provide authenticated encryption. That's what we call the SCT mode. So that's something that we published at Crypto with Yannick Serin. And this is also part of the winning candidates of the CISA competition. Basically, our candidate was Deoxys2, which is composed of the internal cipher I just described and this mode here. I'm going to describe very quickly how it works, but this is like the main arguments and feature, I think, of our mode. So it's a very key thing for me is really it's extremely simple. I can really describe this into basically one slide. If you look at other authentic encryption algorithms, they are quite complex. There's a lot of details. Implementation is not so easy, and this is very different in our candidate. It's a two-pass mode, which means you need to go through the message twice, not the authenticated data that you want, but only the message. You have to pass twice through it, which is quite a strong constraint. But this is required because you need this if you want to provide non-specious resistance. There's no way to provide non-specious resistance if you don't go twice through the message. So it provides full n-bit security, so beyond birthday security and up to actually the maximum, as long as you respect the nonce. And if you do repeat the nonce, so that's the nonce misuse case, then it provides birthday security. Actually, in practice, it provides full n-bit security. The reason why is because our bound here goes to birthday only if you repeat always the same nonce, which means like you're gonna query 2 to the 64 data every time using the exact same nonce. So that's a very, very bad randomness source, I would say. So in practice, you might have some repetition of nonces, but not as much as this. So in practice, I do believe it actually provides full n-bit security even when you repeat the nonces. So yeah, the goal is to use this with the OxysBC. No pre-computation also, so there's almost no overhead if you go for small messages. So you don't have to prepare tables, you don't have to prepare some internal keys or whatever. You just really directly process your message as they come. Fully parallel, inverse free, which means you don't need any inversion of the internal primitive, which in hardware is quite a nice feature. Okay, I'm gonna go quick, and again, no patent on this. Okay, sorry. I don't want to. You don't have to. Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. So yeah. Okay. Then one last thing about this is also we have extra tweak input. So because it's tweakable block cipher, you can use this tweak, but you can use it for the cipher to build the mode, but you can use it for other protocols that might plug on top of this primitive. And this is actually pretty nice feature because you can use it, for example, for leakage resilience. You can use it also for example, disk encryption. You can use it for hashing. So by using this tweakable block cipher, there's a lot of things you can do very easily and with very strong bounds. So this is the slide basically explaining how it works. Everything is there in just one slide. So that's my data I want to authenticate. That's my message I would like to encrypt and authenticate. What I'm doing is simply make it grow in parallel through all my tweakable block cipher calls. It's keyed with my secret key, and you have a counter inside the tweak. And that's it. I just process this in parallel. When I'm done, I get one call to create the authentication tag. When I'm done with this part, I take the authentication tag, put it in the tweak to process all my messages that I'm basically encrypted with a kind of a counter mode. And again, I'm gonna have the counter, but this time in the tweak, not in a classical way where you have it in the plaintext. Here I have the counter in the tweak, basically. And that's it. That's how the mode works. There's no special table to prepare, no special key, no many details, so yeah. All right, there's another mode. I mean, still, there's another mode I would like to propose, which is called ZMAC. It's a mode that's it's a kind of we can see it as a trade-off compared to the previous mode as described. I'm not going to go into details for this one, but it's something I proposed in 2017 with 3 colleagues, and it's a little bit more complex. I'm not going to describe it here in details. But basically what it provides, it's a little bit more efficient. It's more complex to implement, so that's why I would say it's a trade-off. But it's a little bit more efficient, and it provides full n-bit security completely for nonce prospecting and nonce misuse. Okay, so no compromise here at all. I would like just to make, before finishing, a quick comparison, because there is a RFC that has been created, I think, for ASGCM-SIV very recently. So ASGCM-SIV is an algorithm that also tries to provide the same kind of features that I've been describing here. So in order to compare it, I think one key point is really the fact that the OXIS2 has been actually chosen by the cryptographic research community as the winner of the competition, which is kind of like a message to say that we have been analyzing this candidate, and we believe that this is the one offering the best trade-off in terms of efficiency, features, and actual security it provides. As I said, it's much simpler and flexible. I think for implementers, this is really something important. There's also the issues potentially of timing attacks. So GCM family is quite sensitive to timing attacks. If you don't have hardware encryption, you have to use big tables in order to make it like really efficient. So on constrained devices might be not so good. In our case, it's very different. So you basically just use a bit-size implementation of AES, and basically you directly put this in the mode, and that's it. There's no extra stuff you need to handle. in order to have constant time implementation. It also provides higher security. So when you look at the bounds compared to ASGCM-SIV, they are better in our case than in the case of ASGCM-SIV. So which means if you use a certain amount of data, the guarantee you get on the advantage of the adversary is higher, both in the non-respecting and in the non-misuse scenario. It's more efficient in the hardware because all these details you have to implement for ASGCM basically inside it's quite costly in terms of hardware, which is not the case for our candidates. And again, as I mentioned, there's this tweak input that is quite useful to build many things. So basically, because I've seen some discussion about using some authenticated encryption and also some hashing. I can't remember for committing. I can't remember what was the message, but basically, our candidate is exactly the kind of scheme that can provide directly with one primitive hashing, authenticated encryption, and many different things, like quite easily. Okay. Oh, sorry. One last thing. So in terms of efficiency, this is in software. Okay. So actually, I think our comparison is much better. Not in the case of software, but in the case of software, of course, this is probably one of the most interesting. So this is for really latest Intel processors that have AES hardware acceleration. So ASGCM-SIV is actually more efficient, especially for long messages, but it has also quite a big initialization process. Okay, it needs to create some keys. It has some rigging inside. So all this takes quite a few AES rounds to compute. So when you look at the efficiency, this is in terms of how many AES rounds you need to do for the M block, authentication block, the initialization and tag. So those are the three schemes I was talking about. But actually, when you look at some like internet mix, for example, like what size of packets you can expect, etc., you can see that actually for small packets, this is actually faster. When you get medium-sized packets, it starts to be slower, and then for long messages, it's about 1.7 times basically slower. Okay, so that's the trade-off. And that's it. Do you have any question?
Dmitry Belevsky, Technical Center of Internet. Did you study possible applying of the RECAIN mechanism standardized as RFC 8645 for including such properties as side channel attack protection and birthday limitations? Thank you.
Yeah, so we haven't studied this yet. We are currently working on some modes that will provide leakage resilience, but I mean, this is ongoing work, so yeah. All right, thanks.
Well, I think it would be good. So Daniel Migo Eriksson, I think it would be good we come with a draft and a specification of the winners. So if that's possible, I think that's the right working group.
Yeah, I'm honestly quite new to the process, so I mean I'm ready to write stuff, etc. I just don't know when, and.
Hello, Vasily Shishkin, Kryptonite. How many external cryptanalyses do you have about the Oxys 2? And
so
and the second question is for how long the final description of the Oxys is called?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the latest version dates. So we published this. The first one was in 2014. We make some modification in 2015, I think, in the late 2015. And since then, I don't think we have changed anything. Then all the cryptanalysis that has been done is actually independent of all the change. The change were like basically small changes. But the cryptanalysis, all the work, not all the work, but some of the work is listed on our website. If you click, then it lists all the cryptanalysis that has been performed.
Thank you.
Stanislav Myshlev. So thank you very much for this presentation, and I really think, and I told that in Montreal, that now we have some new very good options for AAD and new properties to address in AAD modes, and so not just a question, but just a comment that maybe while we collect one or more 3 good AED modes, and we can clarify the requirements from the IETF community to a new AED mode to be considered, maybe we can repeat our experience, not yet ended, with PEG, when we started with requirements for PEGs and then the contest, and maybe organizing the AED selection process in IETF can be a good idea. And I think that DOCSIS 2 will, of course, can be one of most strongest competitors here, because I really like this, and I think that the structure itself is very mature, very good, and thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about the process. So the crypto community went through this work already. So without, of course, IETF, but as I'm one of the representatives of the crypto community, I participate a lot. And I think a lot of people actually already worked on this competition, tried to analyze it, and came up with 3 different portfolios to try to cover different use cases. There's one portfolio for like very fast software authentic encryption. There's one portfolio for constrained devices, and there's one portfolio for robust defense in depth. So this is the one, like the winner for the defense in depth.
Yes, personally, I don't have any doubts in security of DOCSIS 2. In fact, personally, but what I'm saying is that some additional properties that should be considered regarding the integration to protocols can occur. For example, I think that the next presentation we have here in the session will be about key committing AED, and this is one of the properties that seems to be important for some protocols in IETF. For example, it's important for some schemes that are considered now, and maybe additional things like whether we prefer non-misuse resistance, but for the cost of going to calculate MAC and then encryption, or just to be as parallelizable as possible, but without non-misuse resistance. So it can be a discussion. Again, I'm not saying that I personally have any doubts in security of DOCSIS 2. I'm just saying that there's also always a balance between a lot of properties. So,
Sure. I agree.
Thanks for that, Stanislav. And it's something that we will keep under consideration as the chairs. There's quite a lot happening in the AAD space we'd like to explore. Speaking of which, I'm going to be myself giving a presentation on behalf of Paul Grubbs and Tom Ristenpart. So unfortunately, the authors of this presentation weren't able to make it, so they asked me to come and read their slides. So that's what I'm going to do. So committing authenticated encryption is what we're talking about right here. As a high-level summary of what we're going to cover in the next 5 minutes or so, what is committed authenticated encryption, and how is it different than regular authenticated encryption? We're all familiar with things like AES GCM, and AES in different modes. Poly, we've standardized, well, we have filed RFCs, published RFCs about multiple ones of these. We just saw a great presentation about a AEAD mode, DOCSIS 2. So what is committing authenticated encryption? It's an authenticated encryption where it's hard to find a ciphertext with multiple correct decryptions. So in a committing AE, ciphertexts are binding commitments. And one way to think of this is with the physical intuition of physical encryption. So thinking of a safe and a key. So if keys are random and hidden, then the box hides what's inside it, giving confidentiality, and you can't change an already locked box. But this intuition fails if the keys themselves can be adversarial. So if this is sort of where the physical analogy breaks down with regard to authenticated encryption. If the keys can be adversarial, then authenticated encryption has no security with the attacker control of the keys. So ciphertext can have multiple correct decryptions. So you can, if you can swap out the key, you can make it seem like you're decrypting something else that you didn't decrypt. A committing AE binds this ciphertext to a specific single decryption. I'll go a little bit more into what that means going forward. So why is this important? What goes wrong without it? Well, just as a high-level example here is counter mode is not committing. Any ciphertext can be decrypted under any key. The fact that it's XOR means you can change what a proper decryption is going to be if you have the key. And adding a MAC does not help. So Galois counter mode itself is not committing. In fact, most of the modes that we have here that we use in protocols in the IETF are not committing. So AES-GCM, CHA-20 Poly 1305, OCB mode, encrypt then HMAC with distinct keys is also not committing. You could also throw AES-GCM SIV in this bucket. The one mode that we do have that actually is key committing is this encrypt then HMAC with derived keys. So this is surprisingly something that we've known has been a good model for a long time, but one that many protocols have moved away from. Okay, so where is this needed? Where is this used? The work that led up to this presentation was presented, and it's based on a feature in messaging services called message franking. This is specific to the Facebook encrypted messenger. It's a method of reporting abuse for encrypted messages. So essentially, if a message is sent to you over an encrypted channel end-to-end, you can report it to Facebook, and you can do so without revealing the rest of the messages that you've encrypted or anything else. So this lack of committing AD led to this invisible salamander bypass. So with AES-GCM, an attacker is able to take this abusive image, which is a salamander in this case, and sort of replace it with a kitty cat. So Facebook was not able to actually verify whether an abusive message was sent or not. So this is one use case. A second use case is opaque, which is, as we just mentioned, still in the opaque process. It becomes more fragile if the AE is not committing. So in particular, it reduces the security of this opaque significantly if you don't have this a primitive that has this feature itself. A committing AE ensures transcript consistency in group messaging. So this is potentially of interest to MLS and the MLS working group. And it's widely used in research that may be deployed in the future. So the process, I guess, here was something that we're kind of clarifying, but in this slide it says, why is an RFC needed? What should the RFC say? I'm not recommending that this is exactly a piece of work that's going to be adopted, but this is more of a general presentation, and this is kind of suggestions from the authors as to what the benefit would be of having a published document in the CFRG about this. So specifically, RFCs mean fewer mistakes, better designs. Misunderstanding is widespread. You can implement something incorrectly if you have a solid, readable, and well-vetted RFC. It's a lot easier to get things right and to make things interoperable. A committing AE is a construction that's tricky and has many pitfalls. Making sure that all of those pitfalls are spelled out in a document is valuable, and you can dispel confusion, mandate good schemes. So there are many knobs to tweak here. As we heard in the last authenticated encryption talk, there are multiple options for symmetric encryption that have different trade-offs in terms of performance and setup and whatnot. Having some recommendations for IETF implementers would be a good thing. And with that, I think that's the end of this presentation. So I can take questions. I don't know if I can answer them.
Thank you, Nick. In fact, that's a great presentation that reflects a very good overview of the problem. In practice, I totally agree that a misunderstanding of properties that are gained by AD encryption is really widespread. In my practice, I have seen such examples. It was terrifying. And I would say that in theoretical cryptography, bit committing schemes and committing schemes are one of the main building blocks of good schemes. So I think that we really do need them. And I would just say that I totally agree that we need to encourage people to be involved in the process of thinking of how to do this in more convenient way. Thank you very much. I think it was a very important, great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks. Phil.
Phil Harnbaker. Yeah, this is very helpful to me. So I'd like to see it go forward as an RFC. And I'm designing a cryptographic message system, PKCS7 in JSON. One of the things I'm trying to do is to only provide options that are secure. So I always use derived keys. And if anyone's got time and could look at it and see whether my way of deriving the keys is solid, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. All right. I think we have Richard back up next.
Yes.
All right, who here thinks they know how to multiply? Anybody? Yeah, some people. Turns out it's slightly non-trivial. So in certain circumstances, one would like to be able to update an elliptic curve key pair by multiplying both the private key and the public key by a scalar and get a new key pair. One of the co-authors on this draft, Joel Alwyn, published some e-prints recently about these ideas about updatable public key encryption, where you can get some forward secrecy properties by updating a key with some additional entropy after you've done an encryption to it. And you get some neat forward secrecy out of things that were not forward secret before, doing that sort of update. So like, if you're thinking in kind of standard, good old Weierstrass curve sort of arithmetic, this diagram on the left here commutes. If you take a scalar and you generate the corresponding point by multiplying by the base point, and then you multiply that point by another scalar d, then you get the same result as if you had multiplied the scalar by d and then generated the corresponding point by multiplying by the base point. You have this associative property on scalar multiplication. And it turns out that that is not the case for these more modern curves that have been defined by CFRG. So what we're going to propose here is updating this scalar multiplication operation so that it ends up being compatible with the kind of the other side of this diagram. So the underlying problem here is that these curve groups x25519, x448 do what's called clamping. So before they do the actual point multiplication, they ensure that a high order bit in the scalar is set. So the scalar always has a certain bit set. Which means that when you multiply two values, you have like a 50-50 chance of that bit being set or not. So the raw multiplication doesn't work. That's kind of the core of the brokenness here. But what this draft does is proceed from two observations. One is that if you multiply the two values and you get a value that's not clamped, then if you subtract that value, that product from the curve order n here, then almost always you get a clamped value. So that's observation number one. The second observation is that in the definitions of these curve groups, they're not sensitive to the sign. So using x versus n minus x isn't substantive. You get the same x coordinate, and everything uses the x coordinate in these operations. So it doesn't matter whether you're using the positive or the negative of the point. And so basically what we're proposing here is you can create a multiplication operation that is compatible with the group law. by just taking whichever of these two values is the clamped one. And we propose in the draft some ways to do this in constant time, which you need because you're dealing with private values. But this is the gist of the algorithm here. Now, the kind of asterisk on this is that it doesn't always work. There are some values, if you look at the range of possible scalars, that are where neither the value itself nor its negative in the modular group are clamped, have the high order bit set. And in that case, you have two scalars and their product is neither it or its negative are clamped, and your multiplication fails. So, we thought we knew how to multiply, and we thought multiplication always worked. Turns out in these groups, doesn't quite always work. The good news is that it's rare and it's detectable. So if you write down, you work through a bunch of inequalities, the failure cases, you can define where the failure cases and you compare them to the size of the group. You assume that, if you assume that your two multiplicands are randomly distributed, so the product is randomly distributed, then your probabilities of failure are down in the infinitesimal kind of scale here. So you have low probability of failure, and if you do have a failure, then if you're doing the private key operation, it is detectable. If you're doing the public key half of this, it's not detectable. So there's some subtlety about how you what you would need to do if you were integrating this operation into a protocol, if you wanted to kind of detect and recover from these failures, and not rely on the fact that they're rare. If you want to be able to, in the rare case that it happens, recover from it, you would need to have some communication between the private key holder and folks doing the public side of the operation. So that's the technical content. This is really an awareness raising thing. This is a 0-0 draft that we spun out just before the draft deadline. This came up largely because it's of interest to MLS. In MLS, this updatable public key encryption stuff, if you kind of take this and you merge it with HPKE and you put it into a tree for MLS, you get some forward secrecy properties that attain much more quickly than you would otherwise. So there's some appeal to this updatable PK, public key encryption, in the MLS context, but I thought I'd present it here in case this seemed like a useful thing to anyone else, to see if there's interest in maybe doing something in CFRG here. So with that, I'll take comments, questions.
Yaron Chef, a very pragmatic question. Can you do any of this with out-of-the-box libraries, or are we assuming that people will be doing their own multiplication, all the side channel fun and so on?
Yeah, so it is possible. The authors have done some experimentation. It is possible to use X25509 libraries as they are now, if you can get access to the raw bytes of private keys. So you can do this. It is possible to implement it, and I think if you implement the algorithms as we have them in the document, you end up with something that has a reasonable chance of being side channel free, or being at constant time as best we can. I think in the longer run, one of the benefits to doing an RFC about this would be, it would be good to get this, if this operation and the kind of protocols that you might build out of it are useful, it would be useful for these things to be in the libraries themselves, so you didn't have to kind of pull out the raw key bytes and manipulate them.
I agree. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be one of the benefits to doing some work here, is that it would, easier to justify library development if there's a consistent of it. Yeah. Questions, comments? Rich, got a comment? Come on. All right, well, happy to have further discussion on the list.
That's good.
I think our program for today is finished. So we actually, any other business section?
Real chatty group today. Okay, well, thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time at CFRG.
Yeah.